This is the Redmi Note 9 Pro 5G, the world's cheapest 108 megapixel camera smartphone. And this is my unboxing and extremely detailed review in which I will touch base with all aspects of the device, since phones are more than just about the cameras. However, I will be covering the camera section of this video in great detail due to it being one of its main selling points. We get a USB Type A to Type C cord in the box after we unwrap that silicone case, and we also get paired in the box a 33-watt charging block, and yes, the phone can charge at 33 watts. So all that leaves us left with is the device itself. I have the lake and autumn color variant of the phone. That is how it translates here in China. You also get the sea and stars, which is pretty much blue, and the silent starry sky, which is a black fade. I really like this baby blue into kind of rose goldy pink color. It looks absolutely fantastic, and that camera module just looks gorgeous. We get a massive 4820 mAh battery, 33-watt fast wire charging, IP53 certified dust and light water spray resistance, and NFC connectivity. We have Gorilla Glass 5 at the front and the back, but unfortunately we're stuck to a plastic frame. Fingerprint smudges aren't really a thing with this nice frosted glass back. Of course, with Gorilla Glass 5, it looks pretty similar to most OnePlus devices out there. Slap on that cover makes it even more misted, giving it a nice clean look. We have the fingerprint sensor integrated within the power button, a non-split volume rock on the right hand side, and IR blaster at the top, and we do have a dual SIM slot on the left hand side with support for a micro SD. We also have USB Type C at the bottom, though only with 2.0 transfer speeds and a 3.5mm headphone jack. Cheers. We also have dual stereo speakers, one firing at the bottom and one at the top within the earpiece, and I've also noticed the earpiece pairs up a bit as a notification LED. It says built for 5G on the camera. A little bit odd, I'm not quite sure how we can get 5G within the camera. Nevertheless, the actual camera module is quite steep. It's almost like a bit of a mountain over here, meaning that the rocking effect of the phone is quite intense on a flat surface compared to other devices around. This is not the best thing, but slap on that cover and you shouldn't notice much of a difference. Design wise, I think it looks the cleanest of these three other phones right here, especially that Poco M3 with a very bold black statement over there. It looks very similar to the OnePlus 8T with that nice frosted glass finish at the back. That is the back, and it looks absolutely stunning. But what about the front? Well, we are treated to a 20:9 aspect ratio, 6.67-inch punch hole display. It is indeed a full HD, but unfortunately IPS LCD. The good thing here is that we get a max peak brightness of 600 nits, and we have a 120 Hz refresh rate panel with 240 Hz touch sampling rate, which is great. Comparing the color accuracy to OLED and AMOLED on the right hand side over here, it doesn't quite pop as much as those displays, though I can't really complain when you're using it indoors. You're only really going to notice much outdoors, and when you take into consideration white balance, where you can clearly see the difference between AMOLED and IPS LCD. Though I must say the brighter IPS LCD display of the Redmi Note 9 Pro 5G is slightly better than that of the Poco M3 beside it, since it is a little bit dimmer. It is pretty symmetrical borders wise around the phone, and it doesn't do a bad job when it comes to 120 Hz. Of course, you can't really notice much of a difference here between these devices, but you really have to feel it. The 120 Hz on the three devices on the right definitely feel a lot smoother than 60 Hz panels out there. We also have a couple different options when it comes to brightness and color modes in order to tweak your display. You can hide the notch, but when you go back to show your notch, it does this strange thing, and hey, who knows, we get two selfie cameras. That's a thing in 2020. It eventually came right, and I'm sure this will be addressed with a future software update. And we also get dark mode. Of course, we cannot adjust the dark mode color to be darker or more gray like you see on the recent Oppo ColorOS 11 devices. And there is no always on display here, since it's an IPS LCD panel. So we also have a fingerprint sensor mounted on the side, which is physical and not under display like you see on many AMOLED panels these days, since it can't actually work underneath an LCD panel. Comparing it to the Poco fingerprint sensor, it's pretty much neck and neck over there. And comparing it to the Xiaomi Mi 10 Ultra's optical one and OnePlus 8T's optical one, it's pretty much of a muchness. When it comes to facial recognition, the Redmi Note 9 Pro 5G is slightly quicker than the Poco. It is slightly quicker, actually quite a lot quicker than the Mi 10 Ultra over here. And it seems to be pretty on point with the OnePlus 8T. Sometimes the OnePlus 8T does feel a tad quicker, but that's that selfie cam is used for more than just facial recognition. We get a 16 megapixel f2.5 selfie snapper in the front, same as the Mi 10T Lite, which is identical to this phone. The main difference between the two is that this packs 108 megapixel back cam. Selfie cam pics look nice and snazzy.
This is TechNick recording a 1080p 30 FPS video on the Redmi Note 9 Pro 5G. It is completely capped at 1080p and limited to 30 frames per second when recording using the selfie cam. Let me know what you guys think of the video quality as well as the audio quality on the Note 9 Pro 5G when recording with the selfie cam. There is also cyberpunk mode for the selfie cam, of course. I'm not sure where I've seen this one before, but I mean, it still looks pretty dope.
At the back, we are treated to Samsung's new HM2 sensor. It is 108 megapixels with an aperture of f1.8, and we can use 9:1 pixel binning to get a 12 megapixel shot. We also have an 8 megapixel ultra wide and two 2 megapixel cameras, one being depth and one being macro. Here is the 108 megapixel main still, and switching to the 12 megapixel bin still, which is of course 12 megapixel, you can see a bit of a difference, but the main difference you can notice is when you crop in. I'm doing a 1000% crop over here, and there is a massive difference in detail when cropping into the shot. This is obviously after I've taken the photo. Cropping into it, you can see a huge difference between 108 over here and 12 megapixels over here. It's using the same sensor, but that extra megapixel count certainly smoothens the edges when cropping in. Here we're going to do it once more. You can see the main crop over here. Of course, it is a bit shady in Shanghai at the moment, but look around the edges of the trees. You can see a massive difference between 108 crop and a 12 megapixel crop. We do have a 2x zoom digital option on the 108 megapixel this time. It does a great job, and when you crop in, you can once again notice the difference between the 12 and the 108. 108 aside, let's focus on the ultra wide, which looks great. 12 megapixel main, and going into the 2x zoom digital. This is not a cropped shot. This is the actual zoom functionality of the phone. And going into 10x digital zoom, it's not very usable. It actually looked better as a crop shot. 8 megapixel ultra wide, once again not too bad. 12 megapixel main bin shot, not too shabby. 2x zoom digital, I guess it's usable, but as soon as you crush into that barrier 5x and 10x digital zoom, you can't even see the number plates on this car. Talking about cars, we have an audio over here, and it looks great with portrait mode enabled. It actually does a fantastic job with close objects and far objects respectively, even here, so with my hand. We also have a macro sensor. Of course, it is only 2 megapixels, but getting up close and personal really takes some nice crisp and clear shots. Like you can see with my watch over here, you couldn't even see the text beforehand using the regular camera. Of course, we have video over here, max being 60 FPS, 1080p. You cannot use 4K 60 FPS. Unfortunately, we're limited to 4K 30 FPS over here. So no 60 FPS when it comes to 4K, no 8K video either, since we're not using a Snapdragon 865 chip or something run on 7nm tech. And it doesn't look too bad. I guess we have ultra wide once again capping at 30 FPS and 1080p this time, which kind of sucks, and there is no form of stabilization mode. There is no form of stabilization either, so it doesn't look the best when recording while running around. We do have a cyberpunk filter. Cyberpunk 2077 is that upcoming game I'm sure you guys have heard of. I'm pretty sure I've seen this filter in other phones around. Wink wink. Let's move on to the software department. We are treated to MIUI 12, but unfortunately it is skimmed over Android 10, even though Android 11 is available. Hopefully we'll get that Android 11 update pretty soon. It feels like any other Xiaomi device would feel. We have option for pop-up windows. We can also jump into split screen, which is great, but when you do go into the floating window, unfortunately you can only use one at a time, where the Poco M3 could go all the way up to 3, which was absolutely crazy with a worse chipset than you see here on the Redmi Note 9 Pro 5G. We also have something called focus mode. I'm not sure where I've seen this before, and the haptics on this device feel better than I would have ever expected. Now let's go ahead and listen to some music on those dual stereo speakers. Most phones in this price bracket seem to prefer the loudness of the bottom firing speaker as opposed to the earpiece, but there's a nice balance over here. We also have Game Turbo, which is pretty much an interface where you can store all your games, and you can use an interface with like an overlay, a screen overlay, when you're playing games to open up mini programs such as Google Chrome if you'd like, and running a 120 FPS game. Unfortunately, we're only hitting 60, but fortunately for us, there are other smartphone games around which do allow for high refresh rate panels to take advantage of it, such as Bullet Force, and we're getting a solid 120 FPS. The frame rate did seem to dip quite a lot over there, pretty much in the 90 zone, but at least we're getting a high refresh rate experience when gaming. Dead Trigger 2 is another one with no FPS cap. Let's see, smooth 120 FPS. Now, of course, for the big boy, PUBG Mobile, the game that most of you guys play, unfortunately, we're getting a max of HD and frame rate of high. We don't get that wonderful new 90 FPS option, so we're stuck to 40 using Ultra FPS. It still looks pretty nice and it feels smooth as well. We're getting a solid 40, so that's all right. The speakers definitely sound phenomenal for this price bracket, and now to test out some benchmarks, starting with AnTuTu version 8.4.9. We're going to speed through this one. If you guys would like a more detailed one, stay tuned for an upcoming video in the coming weeks. And jumping into the final results over here, the battery has drained by 3%, getting a 14.46 mAh per minute drain reading, which is better than the 20.5 we usually get on my channel. However, the battery heated quite a lot more, as well as the CPU, as opposed to other smartphones on my channel. When it comes to final results, of course, we're not going to touch the likes of the Snapdragon 865, but we did get a pretty great score here with 343,000, which is better than pretty much everything else in this segment. Next benchmark to test out is Geekbench 5. Of course, we're rocking that 750G chipset from Snapdragon, and we also have UFS 2.2 storage, by the way, as well as LPDDR4X RAM. When it comes to single core performance, we got a score of 659, multi-core of 2003, right at the top of the other chipsets pretty much in this price bracket. Same thing when it comes to compute benchmark scores. When it comes to OpenCL, we got the highest score compared to its competitors. And when it comes to Vulkan API GPU testing, we also get a higher score than the average 750G chipset, as well as the 765G, which you see in the OnePlus Nord and all the rest of them. The Redmi Note 9 Pro 5G is quite a mouthful to say on the fly, but it is a stunning looking device with a really gorgeous frosted glass back and incredible camera setup, though I would have loved to see a telephoto camera over here. If you switch it over to the front, you get welcomed to a 6.67 inch IPS LCD screen. Though it doesn't sound that impressive as AMOLED, we do have a wonderful 120 Hertz panel, which feels nice and buttery smooth. And yes, that does translate into gaming terms with pretty much 120 FPS in many games, but it is not alone in the smartphone race of 2020. There are phones cheaper than it, but don't do things quite as well as it. There are phones slightly more expensive as it, but once again lacking in the camera department, and there are those beefy up phones which are absolutely incredible, but they're just far too expensive. The Redmi Note 9 Pro 5G is a stunning device for the reasons that it matters, mainly being that 108 megapixel camera, 120 Hz refresh rate panel, and massive battery. Of course, there are better phones out there, but there are very few that can match this spec monster at this price tag.